Welcome to the Tax and Subjects Podcast. I'm Ryan Norton, and today we're going to be discussing the Taxpayer First Act. Now, according to Congress.gov, the Taxpayer First Act, or H.R. 3151 for those following along at home, is a bill that, quote, revises provisions related to the IRS, its customer service, enforcement procedures, cybersecurity and identity protection, management of information technology, and use of electronic systems. And it was signed into law on July 1. To help sort through all that, I'm joined once again by Drake Education Tax Team Lead, Amanda Watson. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me today, Ryan. It's such a fun time to be here.
It is. There's a lot of stuff changing. July 1's not that far away from where we are today.
Right. And this Taxpayer First Act is really the first significant tax law that's passed since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So a lot of people are looking at it.
Like I said, there's a lot of different areas they're covering in this, and as you might suspect by the name of the bill, they are trying to find ways to make sure the IRS can better serve taxpayers in general, which, interestingly enough, and the taxpayer advocate is part of this, that office was opened up to do that very thing as well, to help make sure the IRS better serves taxpayers. So let's just jump straight into it. And the first thing I want to ask is, what are the 5 most important takeaways from the Taxpayer First Act? What will stand out to tax preparers?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is this law is not like other tax laws that we've seen. It's mainly a procedural or administrative law to put, like you said, in place ways and systems and organization for the IRS to serve taxpayers more efficiently. And I think that most taxpayers don't realize that the IRS is there to help serve them and help them navigate their way through the tax law. So this law has modified and added certain bits and pieces of the law to help them and help the IRS become more organized, because it's been a long time since the IRS has had a good update to its systems and organization.
Yeah. All right, so what are those 5 things?
The 5 things. Well, that is the one thing I would say. The first thing we just talked about was the overall idea of the law and how that, what it is meant to do. But one of the things that, like I said, it's kind of all over the place. Not really all over the place, but it's modifying different bits of the law. It's not just about one specific thing. But one thing this act does is that it establishes the IRS Independent Office of Appeals. So now it says independent. While they're still part of the IRS, it is independent so that the taxpayer can get a fair and balanced appeal process. And it created a new section 7803E, which creates a new office, and it's the Chief of Appeals. Now, this Chief of Appeals will report directly to the IRS Commissioner, but the purpose of this IRS or Internal Revenue Service Independent Offices of Appeals is to resolve, this is quoting the law, resolve federal tax controversies without litigation on a basis which is fair and impartial to both the government and the taxpayer. It's important. And B, it promotes a consistent application and interpretation of and voluntary compliance of federal tax law. And lastly, it enhances public confidence in the integrity of the IRS, which is really important. So again, it's going to maintain existing appeals jurisdiction over tax controversies, but they do have this newly appointed Chief of Appeals.
So in addition to the Internal Revenue Service Independent Office of Appeals, what's like the next point that tax professionals should kind of keep on their radar as they move into getting ready for next season?
One thing I think that tax professionals and taxpayers alike will really look forward to is their improved strategy with customer service. And if you've been in the industry for any amount of time, you'll know that customer service is a point of contention with a lot of folks with the IRS. And with the Taxpayer First Act, there is an outline of specific timelines that must be met for different types of organization. One thing that this act prescribes is that within 2 years of enactment, which you reminded us was in July, the IRS is to make an updated internal revenue manual, the IRM, the Internal Revenue Manual, which is very important to not only the employees of the IRS, but to tax professionals, so that tax professionals can see how the IRS will handle certain situations. And this is really important. And having that updated piece along with some benchmarks that are required to be in place for how calls are handled or make online customer service available, some things like that. Their initiative to improve customer service with the IRS is something I think that tax professionals would probably cheer about. Be very happy to have that in place.
So we've got the new Office of Appeals.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a new manual to help streamline customer service.
Right.
What's next on the itinerary?
Well, there's several things here, but one thing that I wanted to mention is this third-party summons. Now, I'm just pulling bits and pieces out of the act, but the third-party summons. Congress is going to require the IRS to provide reasonable notice in advance to a taxpayer of a third-party summons. And this means at least 45 days before the beginning of contacts of third parties, but not greater than a year before. And so this really provides the IRS an opportunity to go back to its original implementation of safeguards on third-party contacts. And what this means is if the IRS is investigating something, they're going to notify you, Ryan, before they contact your bank. And without this, they may have been able to contact your bank without telling you first. So that is pretty important.
Yeah, give you time to react.
Yes.
Start taking action.
Yes. And I think that the goal here is to provide a meaningful opportunity for the taxpayer themselves to provide the information to the IRS prior to even seeking out the information from third-party contacts, and hopefully streamline the process and, again, give taxpayers more confidence in the IRS.
And just, I guess, encourage that voluntary compliance with the
Absolutely.
law.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is so important. And I think that was one of the overall goals of the act.
All right, so we've hit appeals, we've hit the new IRM.
Okay. Well, a couple of the other things I think fall under the modernization of the IRS. And one way they hit this is cybersecurity. I know that everyone's been hearing a lot of information about cybersecurity, but there is specific criteria laid out in this law to address how the IRS must work with both public and private sectors to prevent security risk and to enhance cybersecurity. And I know that the IRS has been diligently working on this for the past few years, and they've made some huge strides in reducing and eliminating some tax refund identity theft. So I think they're really on the right track here. But one point I wanted to make about this, of course, they're going to be upgrading their systems, but there's one piece I wanted to pull out that I thought was pretty interesting. Currently, in order to get an identity protection pin or an IP pin, one must be the victim of identity theft. So if I wanted to get one and I am not a victim of tax-related identity theft, I can't get one. I have to wait until after this terrible thing has happened to me.
Yeah.
But this act said within the next 5 years, IP pins will be available to any taxpayer who requests one. So I think that's huge. And I would love to have an IP pin just to protect myself. And I think a lot of taxpayers would be happy to know that this is slated to come down with this act.
And I mean, protecting yourself after the fact often seems a little too late.
Right, right. And another thing under the identity theft and cybersecurity is that people who are victims of identity theft will now have a single point of contact at the IRS. Before, you called in and you may get, this person one time and another person the next. And this law establishes that there should be a single point of contact when the victim is dealing with the IRS. And also, it prescribes the IRS must notify the taxpayer when he or she has been a victim of tax-related identity theft.
And that single point of contact, they serve as, is this correct? They serve as a liaison between the taxpayer and the various agencies that will be touching on their case.
You got it, Ryan. Yes. And I think, just having a familiar voice, a familiar name, a familiar person to deal with makes the not so pleasant process a little bit more manageable. And again, just helps the goodwill of the IRS in general and helps the taxpayer.
No doubt. All right. Well, we've hit a lot of points. Last one was cybersecurity. What's your fifth point?
The fifth thing that I think I would bring is just something about innocent spouse. And I know that innocent spouse is something that tax preparers deal with from time to time. But this law has brought a de novo review of equitable liability. And you may be wondering what de novo is. It's D-E-N-O-V-O.
I definitely am.
Yes. And de novo means a fresh look or a new look at these facts and circumstances of the innocent spouse case.
Well, great. So we hit 5 top takeaways. One thing we can mention on the outro here would probably be that the bill is also going to require that the Treasury has to submit a plan for restructuring the IRS such that it essentially will conform to all of the statute or the sections within this new law. And I can actually just read through a couple of these.
Yes, please do. I'd love to hear that.
I'll get out my big book of tax law. It's really nice.
Oh, yeah, I have the law in front of me, too. And this is a great resource. I know a lot of people are afraid of reading the law, but it's not that difficult to read. And I like it.
It really isn't.
It's pretty everyday language.
It looks really big, but realistically, there's not a whole lot of page space being used here.
And look, mine even has the intimidating fonts.
Ooh. That's nice. So specific here, they say the plan's going to include the following, and they've got 5 major sections here. First, it will ensure the successful implementation of the priorities specified by Congress in this act. 2, it's going to prioritize taxpayer services to ensure that all taxpayers easily and readily receive the assistance they need, which is basically what Amanda just covered in several of her points today. 3, it's going to streamline the structure of the agency, including minimizing the duplication of services and responsibilities within the agency. So basically just making it more efficient, again, as Amanda touched on earlier. It's going to best position the Internal Revenue Service to combat cybersecurity and other threats to the Internal Revenue Service. And again, between the Security Summit and other efforts, they've been working on this, but having a plan in place, as you will know for your office, since you have to have a written security plan, that helps you know which steps to take when certain things occur. And then finally, 5, they're going to address the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service such that it should report directly to the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. So
this is a long overdue framework that I think the IRS, the update they've needed for such a long time.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, finally, where can people go to learn more?
Well, I think reading the law is really a great option. Then you really get it from the horse's mouth and you're not really reading some interpretation. But that's what I would suggest.
Well, Amanda, aside from reading it directly from the source document, where else can people go? Can they, say, for example, go to Drake Software Education presentations like an update school to learn more?
That's a great question, Ryan. And of course they can. This fall, Drake Software will be hosting several update schools around the country this fall. And in our morning session, we will have the tax update, which will definitely include portions or the highlights of the Taxpayer First Act. And if you want to sign up for those, you can go to training.drakesoftware.com. In addition to that, we are also developing a webinar, a short webinar just to give the high points of the law. And you can find that on drakecpe.com. It's not there yet, but you can look for it this fall. So there's a couple of opportunities to learn more.
Well, Amanda, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ryan. It is definitely always a pleasure.
And that'll be it for us. We'll see you all on the next Taxing Subjects podcast.